Hello, my name is Andrea, and this is High Literature, a program where I introduce my friends, my books, my comics, art to you, the viewer. Um, I have been going over comics for a while, and this is actually, if you can believe it, I can't believe it, this is my 50th video. And today's Valentine's Day, and I haven't done books in a while, so I figured, you know what, for my 50th video for Valentine's Day, I'm going to go back to books, my first love, because comics came later after my parents opened the shop, and I brought a few books. So I have Hymns to the Night by Novalis, and a very, very, very old copy of Vadis by Henryk Sienkiewicz. Let's see here. This one is from 1925. Oh my God, this is officially 100 years old. Wow, I love you so much. And I brought two books by the greatest writer ever, in my opinion. I love this man so much, Victor Hugo. I have the only complete and unabridged paperback edition of Les Miserables, now a magnificent theater musical. I've never seen the musical. I've never seen the musicals. I guess there are quite a few of them now. Have I seen? I don't think I've seen any of them. I remember in high school, like the last week of school, one of my classes, she ran the Les Mis movie starring Uma Thurman as Fantine. And I think that's it. That's the only Les Miserables I've seen. I've read this book so many times, and I just can't express to you enough. I know it's daunting, but you need to read this book. It's so good. And then The Hunchback of Notre Dame. It is, God, which one do I can't compare. I can't say which one I like better. They are both incredible. And if you had to pick one over the other, I don't know what to tell you. They're both amazing. But yeah, so it's been a while since I've done books, so I figured I'd make up for it by doing more in one. So we've got 4 here. Let's see, what should I start with? I guess I'll start with old Novalis here. So for you David Lynch fans out there, you know how he was big into, like, if you look in the Twin Peaks series in the Fire Walk With Me movie, the subject of the blue rose comes up a lot, and that is from this guy, Novalis. So Novalis, he was a lot of things. He was a polymath, he was a philosopher, he was a poet, he died very young, and he fell in love with Sophie. They were going to get married, and then Sophie died. And then not long after, like maybe a few months later, his brother died. And these back-to-back deaths really put him over the edge. And he was a very, very, very sad man. And then he got happy again. And let's see, I printed this out. He wrote a letter to his friend Ludwig Tieck explaining that he saw Sophie in a dream. It was the first and only dream. And since then, I feel an eternal, unchangeable faith in the heaven of night and its son, my beloved. So what he's saying here is like the night, sleep, being able to dream, that has become heaven for him. And the son of night is Sophie. And from this, he wrote a poem called Hymns to the Night. And it's very beautiful. It's very sad. And let's see here. Hymns to the Night. What living person, if any sense be gifted to him, does not love more than all the wonderful appearances spread out in space around him, the all-joyful light, with its beams and waves, its colors, its gentle presence in the day? As life's innermost soul, it's breathed by the giant world of restless stars that swim in its blue tide. The glittering stone breathes it, the peaceful plant and the animals, so many formed, ever moved force, many colored clouds and breezes breathe it, and above all, the splendid strangers with sensuous eyes, with gliding gait, and with sounding mouth. As a king of worldly nature, it calls each power to countless changes, and its presence alone bears the wondrous splendor of the earth's kingdom. Downwards I turn to the holy, unspeakable, the mysterious night. Over there, far, lies the world, as if sunken in a deep vault. How wasted and lonely her place. In the strings of the breast, deep sadness blows. Memories, distances, youth's wishes, childhood's dreams, the whole long life of short joys and hopeless hopes coming gray-clad like evening mist after the sun has set. Far below lies the world with its bright pleasures. In other spaces, light-pitched happy tents. Shall it never come back to its true children, to the gardens in its splendid house? Or what wells up, so cool and refreshing, so forebodingly under the heart and swallows up the soft air's sadness? Have you also a human heart, dark night? What are you holding under your cloak that grabs so unseen, strongly at my soul? You seem only fearful. Costly balm drips from your hand, from a bundle of poppies. In sweet drunkenness you unfold the heavy wings of the soul and give us joys, dark and unspeakable, secretly as you are yourself, joys which let us sense a heaven. How poor and childish the light seems to me, with its bright things, how joyful and blessed the day's departure. So now, since night makes its servants strangers, you'd sow gleaming spheres in the far spaces to show your omnipotence, your return in the times of your distance. More heavenly than those flashing stars in those far places, we imagine endless eyes which the night has opened in us. Farther they see than the palest of all those countless hosts. Not needing light, they look through the depths of a loving soul, which fills a higher space with wordless delight. Praise to the world queen, the high messenger of a holy world, the guardian of a blessed love. You come, beloved, the night is here, my soul's enraptured, the earthly days past, and you're mine again. I look into your deep, dark eyes, see nothing but love and bliss. We sink onto the altar of night, onto the soft bed. The veil is gone, and lit by the warm pressure, there glow the pure embers of the sweet offering. That's just really, really beautiful. So, yeah, he wrote this after Sophie died because, I mean, how many of us have lost somebody and we just feel most comforted in the night? So she died in 1797, and this got published in 1800. And he died in 1801. And posthumously, another book of his was published because a friend of his got it published, but it wasn't finished, but he just, he just wanted to see it out, so he got it published even though it was incomplete. And it was this unfinished work that Novalis' friend had posthumously published, where the introduction of the blue flower comes into play. So he wrote this book, and it's about a young man who has a dream about a blue flower, and he just becomes obsessed with this flower, and I guess goes on like a quest to try and find it. And Novalis intended for him to find the meaning of this dream and to find the flower, but he died before he could finish the book. So in a sense, the character never found it. He never got to get the answer to these mysteries about this dream. And so this is from the book. The parents had already retired to rest, and the book is called, by the way, Heinrich von Ofterdingen, which is the main character who has this dream. So the parents had already retired to rest. The old clock ticked monotonously from the wall. The windows rattled with the whistling wind, and the chamber was dimly lighted by the flickering glimmer of the moon. The young man lay restless on his bed, thinking of the stranger and his tales. "It is not the treasures," said he to himself, "that have awakened me such unutterable longings. Far from me is all avarice, but I long to behold the blue flower. It is constantly in my mind, and I can think and compose of nothing else. I have never been in such a mood. It seems as if I had hitherto been dreaming or slumbering into another world, for in the world in which hitherto I have lived, who would trouble himself about a flower? I never have heard of such a strange passion for a flower here. I wonder, too, whence the stranger comes. None of our people have ever seen his like. Still, I know not why I should be so fascinated by his conversation. Others have listened to it, but none are moved by it as I am. Would that I could explain my feelings in words. I am often full of rapture, and it is only when the blue flowers out of my mind that this deep, heartfelt longing overwhelms me. But no one can comprehend this but myself. I might think myself mad were not my perception and reasoning so clear, and this state of mind appears to have brought with it superior knowledge on all subjects. I have heard that in ancient times beasts and trees and rocks conversed with men. As I gaze upon them, they appear every moment about to speak to me, and I can almost tell by their looks what they would say. There must yet be many words unknown to me. If I knew more, I could comprehend better. Formerly, I loved to dance. Now I think rather to the music." How cool is that? I have goosebumps. So the blue flower, it ended up becoming like this romanticism symbol, representing love and desire and the mystical yearning for the infinite and unattainable. Because, as I mentioned, Novalis died before he finished the book, so Heinrich never got to find his blue flower. So it just became this symbol of just unattainable yearning and desire and love and the mysterious. And it's no surprise that David Lynch was drawn to that. So yeah, that's my quick little intro to you about Novalis. Definitely recommend checking him out. Fascinating man. Good stuff. Moving on. So, oh my God, Quo Vadis. I have bought this book quite a few times to give to people as gifts. I was living in Minnesota, and it was probably one of the most miserable times of my life. I can't even get into it was bad. I was trapped in this snowstorm and had read everything, had watched everything multiple times, except for this one book, Quo Vadis by Henrik Sienkiewicz. And I just did not want to read this book because, first off, it was historical fiction, just not interested. And it was historical fiction set in Rome during the reign of Nero. And that's when Christianity was like really starting to ramp up. And at this point in time in my life, I was just a hardcore, like, almost nihilistic atheist. Like, the way I see atheists, like, there are practical atheists who just don't believe anything exists because it just doesn't, it's just kind of nonsensical to them. And then there are nihilistic atheists who don't believe in anything in a very dark, hateful kind of way. And I was more of a practical atheist, but getting to a point where I was getting more on the nihilistic side. And the idea of reading a historical fiction book about Christianity, I mean, no. But when you're trapped in a snowstorm and bored out of your mind and have read everything and watched everything and there's just nothing else to do, so I read it just angrily, almost, I just not a spite, but I was very just resigned to my fate, basically, like, fine, I'll read this stupid book. And by the time I finished this book, I mean, I don't mean to sound dramatic, but it just completely changed me as a person. And it's just one of the most beautiful stories I've ever read. It's been made into a movie a few times. I've never seen them, probably never will. I'm just so content and satisfied with Sienkiewicz's book here. And it's about this, like, highfalutin Roman man who falls in love with a battle captive. So the Romans have kind of like this truce, like this neutrality thing going on with the Lygians. And as a show of faith, the Lygians gave to Rome their king's daughter, who is living with this family who treat her very kindly. They love her as their own. She's very well taken care of, and he falls in love with her, and being, you know, just this Roman man who just is used to having anything and everything he wants and never being told no, he's just like, I want her, bring her to my house. And at the same time, Caesar catches sight of her, Nero, and he wants her. Meanwhile, Petronius, who is the Arbiter Elegantiarum, which is basically like the tastemaker, like, he's the person that people look towards for, you know, he knows, he's a high class man, well read, very cultured, and so he's kind of trying to act as intermediary between Vinicius, his nephew, and Nero, and he's trying to get Lygia away from Caesar to give to Vinicius. And this story's just crazy. She manages to escape from all of them and runs away, goes into hiding. Vinicius is like, oh, hell no, she did not. Goes on a rampage looking for her, finds her, tries to kidnap her, and almost dies by the hands of basically her bodyguard, But she stops the bodyguard and she's like, no, don't kill him. You know, we don't do that. We're Christians. And so, but he injures him really bad in his attempt to kill him, but Lygia stops him. And so they bring Vinicius into their home, nurse him back to health, and he's just flabbergasted that these people who he had come to kill so he could kidnap Lygia are being kind to him. And he's just like, what is going on? What is this religion? You people are crazy. What do you mean you love your enemies? What is wrong with you? But over time, he starts to understand that they're not trying to be manipulative. They're not trying to be deceitful. They are sincerely kind, compassionate people who care for each other and look out for each other. And he sees it in the way that they treat other people, particularly slaves, which are just like they're not even acknowledged. Like, they're not even slaves. They're not even human. They're just a fixture in the home. And it's just so alien to him and fascinating, and he just doesn't know what to think. And he gets better. He goes home. His whole world is turned upside down. And meanwhile, Caesar is going to have this feast. And this feast is being put together by Tigellinus, who is very envious of Petronius, the arbiter elegantiarum. So he's just really trying hard to make this like the best party ever and just knock everybody's socks off. And so all the high muckety mucks of Rome, they come to this party, and drunken debauchery ensues. And Poppaea, the Augusta, Caesar's wife, Nero's wife. Well, you know what? I'm just going to read. Okay. Praetorians surrounded the groves. How much time do I have? Okay, we're good. Praetorians surrounded the groves on the banks of the pond of Agrippa, lest over numerous throngs of spectators might annoy Caesar and his guests. Though it was said that everything in Rome distinguished for wealth, beauty, or intellect was present at the feast, which had no equal in the history of the city. Tigellinus wished to recompense Caesar for the deferred journey to Achaia, to surpass all who had ever feasted Nero, and prove that no man could entertain as he could. With this object in view, while with Caesar in Naples and later in Beneventum, he had made preparations and sent orders to bring from remotest regions of the earth beasts, birds, rare fish, and plants, not omitting vessels and cloths which were to enhance the splendor of the feast. The revenues of whole provinces went to satisfy mad projects, but the powerful favorite had no need to hesitate. His influence grew daily. Tigellinus was not dearer than others to Nero yet, perhaps, but he was becoming more and more indispensable. Petronius surpassed him infinitely in polish, intellect, wit. In conversation, he knew better how to amuse Caesar. But to his misfortune, he surpassed in conversation Caesar himself, hence he roused his jealousy. You don't want to make Caesar jealous. Moreover, he could not be an obedient instrument in everything, and Caesar feared his opinion when there were questions in matters of taste. But before Tigellinus, Nero never felt any restraint. The very title Arbiter Elegantiarum, which had been given to Petronius, annoyed Nero's vanity. For who had the right to bear that title but himself? Tigellinus had sense enough to know his own deficiencies, and seeing that he could not compete with Petronius, Lucan, or others distinguished by birth, talents, or learning, he resolved to extinguish them by the suppleness of his services, and above all, by such a magnificence that the imagination of Nero himself would be struck by it. he had arranged to give the feast on a gigantic raft framed of gilded timbers. The borders of this raft were decked with splendid shells found in the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean, shells brilliant with the colors of pearls and the rainbow. The banks of the pond were covered with groups of palm, with groves of lotus and blooming roses. In the midst of these were hidden fountains of perfumed water, statues of gods and goddesses, and gold or silver cages filled with birds of various colors. In the center of the raft rose an immense tent, or rather, not to hide the feasters, only the roof of a tent, made of Syrian purple, resting on silver columns. Under it were gleaming like suns tables prepared for the guest, loaded with Alexandrian glass, crystal, and vessels simply beyond price, the plunder of Italy, Greece, and Asia Minor. The raft, which because of plants accumulated on it, had the appearance of an island and a garden, was joined by cords of gold and purple to boats shaped like fish, swans, mews, and flamingos, in which sat at painted oars naked rowers of both sexes, with forms and features of marvelous beauty, their hair dressed in oriental fashion or gathered in golden nets. When Nero arrived at the main raft with Poppaea and the Augustians and sat beneath the purple tent roof, the oars struck the water, the boats moved, the golden cords stretched, and the raft with the feast and the guests began to move and describe circles on the pond. Other boats surrounded it, and other smaller rafts filled with women playing on cithare and harps, women with rosy bodies on the blue background of the sky, and the water and the reflections from golden instruments seemed to absorb that blue and those reflections and to change and bloom like flowers. From the groves of the banks, from fantastic buildings reared for that day and hidden among thickets, were heard music and song. The neighborhood resounded, the groves resounded. Echoes bore around the voices of horns and trumpets. Caesar himself, with Poppaea on one side and Pythagoras on the other, was amazed. And more especially when among the boats young slave maidens appeared as sirens and were covered with green network in imitation of scales, he did not spare praises on Tigellinus. But he looked at Petronius from habit, wishing to learn the opinion of the arbiter, who seemed indifferent for a long time, and only when questioned outright answered, "I judge, Lord, that 10,000 naked maidens make less impression than one." But the floating feast pleased Caesar, for it was something new. Besides, such exquisite dishes were served that the imagination of Apicius would have failed at sight of them, and wines of so many kinds that Otho, who used to serve 80, would have hidden under water with shame could he have witnessed the luxury of that feast. Besides women, the Augustians sat down at the table, among whom Vinicius excelled all with his beauty. Formerly his figure and face indicated too clearly the soldier by profession. Now, mental suffering and the physical pain through which he had passed had chiseled his features as if the delicate hand of a master had passed over them. All gazed at him now, not excepting Poppaea or the Vestal Virgin Rubria, whom Caesar wished to see at the feast. Wines cooled in mountain snow soon warmed the hearts and heads of the guests. Boats shaped as grasshoppers or butterflies shot forth from the bushes at the shore every moment. The blue surface of the pond seemed occupied by butterflies. Above the boats here and there flew doves and other birds from India and Africa, fastened with silver and blue threads or strings. The sun had passed the greater part of the sky, but the day was warm and even hot, though in the beginning of May. The pond heaved from the strokes of oars, which beat the water in time with music. But in the air there was not the least breath of wind. The groves were motionless, as if lost in listening and in gazing at which was happening on the water. The raft circled continually on the pond, bearing guests who were increasingly drunk and boisterous. The feast had not run half its course yet when the orders in which all sat at the table was observed no longer. Caesar gave the example, for, rising himself, he commanded Vinicius, who sat next to Rubria the Vestal, to move. Nero occupied the place and began to whisper something in Rubria's ear. Vinicius found himself next to Poppaea, who extended her arm and begged him to fasten her loosened bracelet. When he did so, with hands trembling somewhat, she cast at him from beneath her long lashes a glance, as it were of modesty, and shook her golden head, as if in resistance. Meanwhile, the sun, growing larger, ruddier, sank slowly behind the tops of the grove. The guests were for the greater part thoroughly intoxicated. The raft circled now nearer the shore, on which, among bunches of trees and flowers, were seen groups of people, disguised as fauns or satyrs, playing on flutes, bagpipes, and drums, with groups of maidens representing nymphs, dryads, and hamadryads. Darkness fell at last amid drunken shouts from the tents, shouts raised in honor of Luna. Meanwhile, the groves were lighted with 1,000 lamps. From the lupanaria on the shores shone swarms of lights. On the terraces appeared new naked groups, formed of the wives and daughters of the first Roman houses. These, with voice and unrestrained manner, began to lure partners. The raft touched the shore at last. Caesar and the Augustians vanished into the groves, scattered in lupanaria, in tents hidden in thickets, in grottos artificially arranged among fountains and springs. Madness seized all. No one knew whither Caesar had gone. No one knew who was a senator, who a knight, who a dancer, who a musician. Satyrs and fauns fell to chasing nymphs with shouting. They struck lamps with thyrsus to quench them. Darkness covered certain parts of the grove. Everywhere, however, laughter and shouts were heard, and whispers and panting breaths. In fact, Rome had not seen anything like that before. Vinicius was not drunk as he had been at the feast in Nero's palace when Ligeia was present, but he was roused and intoxicated by the sight of everything done around him, and at last the fever of pleasure seized him. Rushing into the forest, he ran with others, examining who of the dryads seemed most beautiful. New flocks of these raced around him every moment with shouts and with songs. These flocks were pursued by fauns, satyrs, senators, knights, and by sounds of music. Seeing at last a band of maidens led by one arrayed as Diana, he sprang to it, intending to examine the goddess more closely. All at once the heart sank in his bosom, for he thought that in that goddess, with the moon on her forehead, he recognized Ligeia. They encircled him with a mad whirl, and, wishing evidently to incline him to follow, rushed away the next moment like a herd of deer. But he stood on that spot with beating heart, breathless, for though he saw that the Diana was not Ligeia, and that at close sight she was not even like her, the too powerful impression deprived him of strength. Straightway he was seized by such yearning as he had never felt before, and love for Ligeia rushed to his breast in new immense waves. Never had she seemed so dear, pure, and beloved as in that forest of madness and frenzied excess. A moment before, he himself wished to drink of that cup and share in that shameless letting loose of the senses. Now disgust and repugnance possessed him. He felt that infamy was stifling him, that his breast needed air, and the stars which were hidden by the thickets of that dreadful grove. He determined to flee, but barely had he moved when before him stood some veiled figure, which placed its hands on his shoulders and whispered, flooding his face with burning breath, "I love thee. Come, no one will see us. Hasten." Vinicius was roused as if from a dream. "Who art thou?" But she leaned her breast on him and insisted, "Hurry! See how lonely it is here, and I love thee. Come." "Who art thou?" repeated Vinicius. "Guess." As she said this, she pressed her lips to his through the veil, drawing toward her his head at the same time, till at last breath failed the woman, and she tore her face from him. "Night of love, night of madness," said she, catching the air quickly. "Today is free. Thou hast me." But that kiss burned Vinicius. It filled him with disquiet. His soul and heart were elsewhere. In the whole world nothing existed for him except Ligeia. So pushing back the veiled figure, he said, "Whoever thou be, I love another. I do not wish thee." "Remove the veil," said she, lowering her head toward him. At that moment, the leaves of the nearest myrtle began to rustle. The veiled woman vanished like a dream vision, but from a distance her laugh was heard, strange in some way and ominous. Petronius stood before Vinicius. "I have heard and seen," said he. "Let us go from this place," replied Vinicius. And they went. They passed the Lupanaria, gleaming with light, the grove, the line of mounted Praetorians, and found the litters. "I will go with thee," said Petronius. They sat down together. On the road both were silent, and only in the atrium of Vinicius's house did Petronius ask, "Dost thou know who that was?" "Was it Rubria?" asked Vinicius, repulsed at the very thought that Rubria was a Vestal. "No." "Who then?" Petronius lowered his voice. "The fire of Vesta was defiled, for Rubria was with Caesar, but with thee was speaking." And he finished in a still lower voice, "The divine Augusta." A moment of silence followed. "Caesar," said Petronius, "was unable to hide from Poppaea his desire for Rubria. Therefore she wished, perhaps, to avenge herself. But I hindered you both. Hadst thou recognized the Augusta and refused her, thou wouldst have been ruined beyond rescue. Thou, Ligia, and I, perhaps." "I have enough of Rome, Caesar, feasts, the Augusta, Tigellinus, and all of you," burst out Vinicius. "I am stifling. I cannot live thus. I cannot. Dost understand me? Vinicius, thou art losing sense, judgment, moderation. I love only her in this world. What of that? This, that I wish no other love. I have no wish for your life, your feasts, your shamelessness, your crimes.